That book's done. This book's not.
Okay, awesome. I hit record. I'm with Aaron Betts. Aaron, give me, I should have warned you before I did this. I totally just hit record in the middle of our conversation. Give me, my bad. Uh, give me like a couple grounding on where you are in your author journey.
Okay.
Couple sentences grounding on where you are
Sure.
now.
So this is my second novel. My first one I wrote in 2020
Nice.
during the shutdown. That was 6 to 9 a.m. Saturday and Sunday. It was my
Yeah,
mental
COVID
mental
project.
feast.
Yeah,
Yep. And I've been editing it ever since.
nice.
So learned a lot of things after I finished writing it. That's been a great journey though. So this was I had two stories that were kind of in parallel,
Okay.
not story wise, but writing at the same time,
Yeah.
and I would kind of bounce between the two. So this is the other one. I did this one during NaNoWriMo, after the last dash or
Okay.
during the last dash,
Nice.
and I wrote half of the book.
Okay.
Um, got my 50,000 words.
Yeah.
Um, and I haven't written anything since. No, I take that back. I wrote one scene during this dash.
Nice. Okay. You got one scene in.
Yeah,
I'll take it. I'll take it.
but
Um,
it's okay because I feel like I think about it all the time, so
yeah.
it's present. But
Yeah.
I've learned a lot about how to approach the scenes better
Okay.
to hopefully lessen the editing process after the fact, right?
Okay. And this is the one, it's got two vehicles.
Two vehicles.
One of them used to be in the past, right? But now you've got them all in line.
Yes.
Am I
Well,
remembering the same story?
correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's two vehicles, Terra and Toshi.
Gotcha.
Toshi is the son of a Yakuza boss. He's
Okay.
trained as a samurai,
Okay.
believes in the Edo uh, kind of era philosophies.
Hmm.
Um, his story starts 5 years before Terra's.
Okay.
But I felt like it was important to show that in interspersing in the beginning of the book, because when you meet him at the midpoint, they're together from their forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm still on the fence about whether I'll include it, how much I'll include, that type of thing.
Okay. And you've got a third plot. So are you okay if I make your spreadsheet live so we can
Yeah,
look at it together?
sure.
Okay.
Hmm.
I never want to assume, but you
No
sent me this
worries.
beautiful spreadsheet. Let's like use it. Um, so yeah, so you've got this gorgeous spreadsheet, cast of characters, and then you've got plot A, plot B, and plot C. Plot B is in Tara's POV.
It
Yes?
is.
It's
Yes,
Tara's the vehicle. Okay.
correct.
Okay, so this is, correct me if I'm wrong, this is a person finds their powers story.
Yes.
Okay. It's not necessarily a coming of age, but it's like
It,
it
it's
yeah.
it's sort of a coming of um uh, community, like meaning like she now feels out of place with the world and wants to find her people.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so it's about she kind of finds belonging in the end
Correct.
through like powers and training and like coming
Correct.
into her own identity through coming to use JP's story hypothesis. Her developing need is identity and her true need is community. Did I get that right?
Yeah, no, that works. I think I originally had she her initial need is understanding,
Yeah.
because she's trying to figure out what she is,
Yeah. What's
and
happening?
her final need is more about affection for her, like her family, her brother,
Yeah.
because her brother at the end, and then through participation of this group that she finds.
Yeah. So in like joining the group and then understanding who she is, she
Right.
she reignites her family bonds and
Yes.
finds belonging. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So how can I help? I've read through the
So,
plot. By the way,
okay.
I love your like total count and word pages. And this is like true nerd spreadsheet time. I love it. Yeah. So how can
um,
I help with it?
this helps me just kind of see, um, where my holes are and stuff. So two things, I guess. One, um, maybe kind of going over a little bit of review of the cast of characters and see if I got those right.
Okay.
But my biggest concern right now, and this just comes because I'm I'm a consumer of media. I love movies. I think kind of in the screenplay format.
Okay.
And I don't know if you have seen this or if you feel this is true, but I feel like a lot of these kind of adventure stories like this, like my other book, um, that there's kind of like 3 to 4 main action scenes, action points. And I've kind of tested this out with a lot of movies like The
Hmm.
Goonies or The Matrix or things like that. And you kind of come to 3 or 4 main decision points where um, either there's a lot of action or some big story beat hits.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's kind of how I plot things out originally, where I start with. My concern with this one is that the more I looked at it, the more I just thought, I wonder if I'm rushing this story. And would it make more sense to do a deeper dive once she hits the grid, um,
Hmm.
of the fight scenes, the battles between the community? Um, am I rushing too quickly into the second half of the story? And then the climax kind of comes, I felt, pretty quickly too. Now, that might be okay. Um, I'm just not completely convinced on the pacing, I guess.
Okay. So let's talk about why you have those action scenes versus um the why you have action scenes versus like why you have 3 or 4 action scenes in one of those movies. And before we look at your plot. So what's happening there is in the action scene, in the high anxiety scene, you get like a burst of energy, a burst of excitement, and then that's followed by a moment of reflection. So the character's tested in the action scene, and then following that, there's a moment of reflection where the character kind of gathers what they've learned and makes a choice about change. So it's that I'm not going to use that language. It's not worth explaining. So, but sorry, side tangent in my brain. But it's that like that's what those 2 moments have a purpose. Action scene to reflection. So the question of should I have longer, deeper action scenes comes into how big and painful is the change the character's going through. Because what we want to see in the action scene is the character either failing or succeeding to take on part of their character growth.
You're
Am
right.
I making sense?
Yep.
And then you
Yep.
want to slow down to reflect on that moment of change that just happened and whether the character is satisfied or unsatisfied with that moment of change. So, like you had mentioned the Goonies, I just watched this
I know.
with
I
my
heard you on the
kids.
podcast.
Oh, did I talk about it? Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's you have moments where they're like getting through a trap,
Right.
like they're playing the keyboard of like the Dead Man's
Right.
stuff and like the
Right.
floor's falling out from under them. And then they get through the trap and then they have a moment where they all kind of gather themselves. And in that moment, they always talk about, do we keep going?
Mm-hmm.
Who are we? And as that do we keep going, the conversation becomes more and more about why are we doing this and who are we in this moment? Does that make sense? Even
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
last trap where they're on the boat and they finally find One-Eyed Willie's treasure, and the vehicle character who's like the lead vehicle in the story, whose name I cannot remember, but he also plays Samwise Gamgee and Rudy. He has a moment of reflection with One-Eyed Willie about like, hey, we've come this far, just like you. Like he has this moment of this one-on-one kind
Right.
of poignant
Yeah.
moment. That poignant moment only works if there's like a big moment of action before that leads us to that poignant moment. So all that to say, the action is bringing about a testing of your character, that your character is going to make choices in during the action. They're going to have consequences. The reflection, the laid back, or as I've learned some authors call it, the sequel, which I hate that term, but that moment of reflection is that time where you're kind of gathering what's happened, and you're like, okay, how much have I changed? So let's look at your plot again, pull it back
Okay.
up again, and tell me, is there does the change she's going through here in this training on the grid at NYC? Because there's a moment in here where there's this betrayal. I don't know why that's folding over on itself. That's really weird. There's this betrayal where
If you
she's
if you highlight the whole sheet and do that,
yeah, I
it'll
don't know.
grow.
It was perfect, and I don't know why it's all of a sudden it's not when I bring it up on this screen. See,
Yeah,
it
there you
made
go.
it worse.
Oh, it did. You're right.
Yeah. So we're just
Interesting.
gonna do this. We're just
There
gonna
you
make
go.
it huge. So there's this moment of betrayal, right? And then Tashi finally, and after the betrayal, which is your momentary action, Tashi has his moment of change, and he's like, "I will train you now." Right, which seems to, am I getting that wrong? That seemed to be like his
No.
kind of pivotal like moment of change.
Yeah. Yeah. Because Aaron has told him you need to do this.
Yeah. So he
Yeah.
kind of has his character growth here, and now we're starting kind of a new portion of the novel. And you can
Right.
tell it's a new portion of the novel because it's so solidly in your plot one. Plot B goes away completely. You get some of
Yeah.
Tashi, but it's mostly part one. Your primary Terra plot. You have this training sequence, right, where she's like, you know, in Tashi's kind of school of training. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Um, does this training sequence, which is this the action scenes that you're talking about?
Yeah, for the most part, there's some scenes when they first arrive at the grid where they actually witness some of the arena battles.
Yeah.
Because this is kind of like a Mad Max-esque organization, right? Fight
Sure.
Club type thing. Fight Club for X-Men.
Nice.
um, and so I guess my concern is, if I was reading this, am I going to be bummed that they showed one little snippet of a fight sequence? They showed her training, and then they're kind of gone, right? They leave. They go to Tokyo.
It's about how much she's learning and how much she needs to prove what she's learned. So the more she's learning, the more we need to see her fail until she finally succeeds.
Okay.
So in that case, if she's learning a ton and she's changing a ton in this time, we want multiple failures and then a success. So you're going to want to show those failures through those fight scenes until finally she kind of wins one. Does that
Okay.
make
So yeah.
sense?
So
So then
maybe
you'd
it's
want
worth.
multiple. But if she's not
Yeah.
changing that much, if this is about like her walking in and being a natural, then no, you
Definitely
just
not.
need one. Right. Like, but does that
Right.
make sense?
Yeah.
Like, and that's what I meant by
Yeah.
like the fight scenes. And so you don't just want multiple fight scenes in here. You want fail, moment of reflection, fail, moment of reflection, win, moment of reflection. We're ready to go. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. If
Yeah.
you
No,
think of
that
like
makes sense.
a lot of these, like coming into your identity, finding yourself stories have
Mhm.
these kind of training montages, and if you think about them, that's how they work. So like in the classic like old Karate Kid, because I know you and I can talk 80s movies, so
Yes.
with Daniel LaRusso and Mr. Miyagi, we
Right.
have these sequences where he's like washing the car, painting the fence, and he gets frustrated. He's like, I don't want to paint the fence anymore. And like, this is stupid. And then he goes back out in the world. We have a moment of application. We're like, let's see how that worked in the world. And it always goes poorly. And then he comes back and he like has a like blow up. We get like an action blow up with Miyagi where he's like, I don't want to do this anymore. You said you'd train me and you didn't train me. And then they have their moment of reflection where Miyagi's like, let me show you what I've been training you.
Yeah.
And then we go back into another montage of like action training where they're now in sync. And then we come out of the action training into another moment of reflection, right? So there you have action training, failure to apply in the world, moment of reflection, kind of volatile moment of reflection, more action training, reflection of success. Does that make sense? So you just have one pattern there, but you can feel that kind of pattern of like, here's the training, here's the failure, here's the training, here's the success. Now, I kind of live in the rule of 3, so I'm kind of like, hey, give me 2 failures and 1 success.
Yeah.
You don't want too many failures because then it's like, how long are we going to do this?
Right.
But I feel like more than, what does she have to learn about herself in this training? What is it that she has to understand about who she is?
She has to learn how to control the power that she's developing, because up until then, and even during kind of the training a little bit, she can only really activate it when she loses her temper, and then it's like an explosion, right?
Okay.
And she's got to learn to control.
What's the appropriate thing she has to learn about herself to control it? Like, how does she personally need to change to move it from this explosive thing to something that's controlled?
That's a really good question.
That's the character change.
I'm not sure I know the answer to that.
That's the character change we're looking for. The character change we're looking for is not how she controls her powers. What happens with her powers is the expression of how she as an individual is changing. And how she is, like, we talk about voice modulation as a representation of character growth. What about her character's changing? The modulation is now I can control my powers.
Right.
So what about her character? Her individuality is growing and changing to bring her to a place where she can accept and control her powers. So like you want Tashi, like in an ideal like learning montage, her mentor, Tashi, is going to set out like, here's what we're doing. She's going to go through the motions thinking she has her own answer. She's going to get her ass kicked, right? Like this is the first Daniel LaRusso thing. Daniel LaRusso. Oof. She's going to get her butt kicked. Then after she gets her butt kicked the first time, she's then going to like maybe try to apply it on her own. Like I can do this by myself. And then she's going to get her butt kicked again. And then finally, she's going to trust what Tashi tells her about herself, and then she's going to be able to apply it. So, and that's the developing need that's changing in her, and that's where the theme of your story comes from. So, like, if she needs to learn to be internally reflective and meditative, and to find her core, that's your book is about finding your center. Right?
Yeah, I think it's, if I could sum it up, it would probably be she has to kind of give herself over to it, right? She has to relinquish control.
Oh, nice. I like that. So she's got to surrender control. So she's got to stop trying to control it and more like the force, let it flow through you. It's very like Luke Skywalker. And like we have his first training montages. He's got the helmet on. And he's getting like blasted by the weird like mech droid that's just like seems to be designed just to shoot people. It's like a training droid and it just like shoots you with little lasers. It's like floating in the air. And they're like, stop trying to control it. And he's like, I can't see anything with this damn visor on. And he fails, right? Like he gets his butt kicked. And then we get the next action montage where he's actually like supposed to be applying his stuff in the, it's, I don't know if they're in the Death Star. I can't remember where they are. It's been a long time, but they're like, it's where Obi-Wan dies. Spoiler.
And the Death Star.
Wars. I just spoiled Star Wars. So he's supposed to like apply his like,
is he really dead though?
Jedi. I know, right? Nobody is in the Star Wars. Evidently, they always bring them back into Star Wars. So I'm gonna keep putting the definite article in front of that just because I know it'll irritate some people. So in the Star Wars, he's supposed to like apply his new skills and be a hero in
Right.
the death first,
The
like we're running around saving Princess Leia battle. And
yeah.
he's not, he's kind of more bumbling. He gets saved a lot by other people, right? Like
Yeah. Right.
he's not the hero he's supposed to be. Again, we have like kind of a failure to apply. It's like a misunderstanding of who he is. And then finally he gets it in the last scene of the movie where he's like flying the X-Wing fighter
X-wing.
through the
He has
Death
to
War. Yeah.
turn off the targeting
He's got
computer.
to
Yeah.
turn off the targeting computer. He's got to let the force flow through him and stop trying to control it. And then he gets victory. So you're
Right.
like, that's kind of the pattern you want to build here with Tara is like, she's trying to do it on her own. She gets her butt kicked. She's trying in her like Mad Max Fight Club for X-Men world. She then like trains with Tashi, but doesn't fully follow him or some kind of block. Whatever is blocking that, you want to accentuate it the second time. And you probably want to put a timer on it. Like, hey, you've got 3 days to figure this out, and then you're going to get your ass kicked again. And so she refuses to figure it out in
Okay.
the 3 days because she's like, I can't do that, whatever that is.
Right.
She gets her ass kicked, and then you want to bring her back to be like, fine, I'm tired of getting my butt kicked. I will come back to you and like do what you want me to do. And then something needs to click. After
Yeah.
each of those butt kickings, she needs a moment of reflection. With Tasha, it doesn't have to be long.
Now,
The first
quick
one,
question.
yeah.
So how would it work if during the trainings here in New York, she just gets her ass handed to her a couple of times, right? I show maybe
Mhm.
two. They leave, go to Tokyo,
Yeah.
and it's in the Tokyo grid, or yeah, the Tokyo grid,
Yeah.
where she finally gets it.
That's more climactic because you're building the tension for like, will she ever get it?
Okay.
That's what Star Wars does is Luke has been a failure until the last moment of the where he has to
Yeah.
get it and then he figures
Right.
it out.
Well, and so even then though, it's not the climax, right?
Yeah, you've got like a whole nother like boss level to the
Yeah, right.
yeah.
Right.
Which is totally fine. You know, there's a I think as long as she still has something to learn, what we don't want to see is her figure it out at the Tokyo grid and
Mhm.
then for the rest of the book she's perfect.
Right. Yeah.
She still needs to learn crap or the
Yeah.
book's over. When she stops learning, when her character stops changing, the story will feel done. So
Okay.
she can win, she can like start to master her powers at the Tokyo grid, but we need an outstanding mystery. By mystery, I mean how is she going to overcome this internal obstacle that is
Mhm.
represented by this external obstacle? So like we're
Okay.
talking about with her powers changing, character growth, the external obstacle of I need to master my powers always parallels an internal obstacle of this is what needs to change about me as a person.
Well, so I think that piece of it would be when she finally relinquishes. So it is kind of relinquishing, right? But she's got to finally relinquish her anger towards her brother because they end up together at the end of the book, and that's critical. If that hadn't happened, she wouldn't win, type thing, right? So she's
Yeah,
got to
that's
finally
perfect.
say, look, I embrace that you're here.
Yeah, so you want her big victory in the Tokyo grid to be like, I've mastered my powers, I've won. I can now do this on my own.
Yeah, and then there's a huge failure at the farm,
Yeah, yeah,
where someone dies.
yeah.
No spoilers.
And they need to
But
die because she tried to do it on her own.
yeah, right,
Yeah,
right. Okay.
yeah. And that, but you see how that internal change is paralleling the external action. That like,
Yes,
and
yes.
what you're doing is in the very beginning of the story, just to like talk about how character growth arcs work. In the very beginning of the story, we're meeting Tara, and you're setting up like, hey, here's the external thing that has to be overcome. And we look at Tara and we're like, oh my gosh, how is that person going to do that?
Hmm.
And ideally, in this like world building foreshadowing, you would be setting up here that she's a control freak in some ways. and like she's not willing to let go or be vulnerable to other things, and she's very independent and wants to do things on her own. Right? Like those two things kind of go
Right.
together.
Yes.
So
Right.
ideally in the opening world, in the setup, you're kind of setting that up, right? Like Tara feels like Tara is enough. Tara doesn't need other people. Tara can control things without help.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then we get the setup of like, oh wait, things have gotten bigger than you.
Yeah.
And like this Tara, and in the setup, you want the reader asking that question. Man, I see this like overarching issue of Tara. You know, how's she going to overcome? The mystery isn't what she needs to overcome. The mystery is how she's going to overcome it
Mhm.
to become the person she needs to be to
Mhm.
accomplish the things she
Yeah.
needs to accomplish.
Yeah. So in the foreshadowing, there should probably be something there about her abuela, her grandmother, basically saying like, you know, you've got to learn to get along with your brother or something to that effect. Right.
Yeah, and it doesn't even need to be that direct. It can be like you have to learn to work with a team. You're not out
Mm.
there by yourself. You have to learn to like unite with others. You know, there's gonna be a time in your life where you have to depend on others, and you need that to do. You almost want that foreshadowing of like this is the future problem in your plot to be a moment where somebody's like quasi prophesying over what is the change you have to make.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? Like, what is the change you have to make? And so you want that moment to be like, you know, hey, if you're going to swim this, you need to go with the current of the water, and you need to, like, I'm just making crap up, but like, you need to flow with the current of the water. You need to trust your team, right?
Yeah.
Like, and she's be like, current of the water is stupid. Fight the current of the water. And I don't need those damn team members. And then, like, that's the foreshadowing, right? Like,
Yeah.
and then you can even have her win if you want, and her be like, see, because she's like justified and like,
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
need this crap, because we're not, that's not actually, it's not a swimming novel, so it's not about swimming, so she's fine to
Right.
win there because you've got a bigger kind of crisis coming up.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, does that help?
Yeah. No, it does.
Yeah. And so, you know, talking about, you know, your characters, right? When we talk about like, when you start describing your vehicle specifically, I always encourage like writers to put in here what the change arc is.
Okay.
They need, and it needs to be one sentence, and it needs to be like, she needs to overcome blank and blank, accept blank and blank about herself in order to, you know, blank. So like
Yeah.
it's that world before end of the novel, who she is, and it works. It work like that kind of build of a character growth arc works regardless of what you're writing, right? Like, you know, when Harry met Sally, Harry needs to allow himself to be vulnerable and stop being cynically defensive when things become uncomfortable in order to find true love, right? Like that's kind of his growth
Mhm.
arc, and we see it from the
Yeah.
beginning where he's like defensive and cynical, and I'm Mr. Death and dark and sad, and he's like, yeah, I can't ever have a friendship with a woman, like meaning I can't ever be vulnerable with a woman without wanting to sleep with her. And
Right.
Meg Ryan's like, well, I guess we can't be friends. And then for the rest of the novel, he's learning to be vulnerable with a woman that he's not sleeping with, and finally he sleeps with her, and he goes right back to his like failure of cynicism, and then he has to lose her to understand, I have to be, she is my friend and I'm vulnerable with her, which makes the relationship better. So like you get that like one sentence growth arc even in a romance of like, this is what the character needs to overcome in order to become this person so that this can happen, right? Like,
Okay.
so you want to write that in here with Tara. When we
Okay.
talk about who's an anchor, anchors are going to encourage her or inspire her to become more controlling and more self-dependent. So there's
Okay.
two ways you can do that with her anchors. One is they create a sense of urgency, right? An anchor that pushes, an anchor that's like, quote unquote inspiring her, but like forcing her into the worst version of herself. That's going to be an
Right.
anchor that creates a false sense of urgency that she needs to have this done right now. So that she keeps trying to rely on herself to do it. That can be through like creating a giant threat that she feels she has to solve right now, and it creates this urgency so that she's not willing to let go of control. An anchor that pulls is going to be an anchor that is like controlling everything through their own force of will. Somebody who
Okay.
models what Tara thinks she should be doing. Now, often an anchor that pulls ends up being a lie in the end, right? Like an anchor that pulls is usually like a trick, like, oh, I was masquerading this way, but that's not what actually is happening. Does that make sense? So, like,
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
had a brawler that did demonstrate to Tara, like, hey, here's how I control my power, and I just do it by like just talking about the New York grid. If you wanted to add an anchor in there, you could have like somebody beat her and be like, yeah, you just got to get a hold of that. Like just grab it like a tiger by the tail and hold on to it. So strap tight. The problem is you're not strong enough to hold on to it. That's an
Uh,
anchor that pulls because that's somebody telling her the opposite of Toshi's advice.
right. Right.
Right. And like somebody that's like, oh, this is who you have to be. You have to be like powerful and strong. So like going back to the Karate Kid example, John Kreese, the like sensei of the Cobra Kai dojo, is an anchor that pulls Daniel LaRusso.
Okay.
He's demonstrating for Daniel LaRusso this is what power looks like
Yeah.
in
Right.
a
Right.
negative way. And Daniel's very tempted to go down that route because
Mhm.
it seems to be an easy answer. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's that
Yeah.
like
Okay.
when you're thinking about the like battle montage, Tashi's already her engine. He's an engine, probably an engine that
Right.
pushes, is what I would define him as. He may be an engine that pulls. He's pretty reflective, right?
Very. Yeah.
Yeah, from what I read. So he's an engine that pulls. He's like, you want to look like this,
Yeah.
model my behavior, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So in that fight sequence to really like land her failures, drop in there like an anchor that pulls,
Okay.
and ideally the person that keeps kicking her butt.
So then Diego would probably be an anchor and not an engine for her.
Mm, talk to me about who he is.
Her twin brother.
Hmm.
He's I kind of flipped his story a little bit. Originally, I was going to make him autistic, but I was got some pushback a little bit because of the whole cure, that the genetic augmentation, if you will, that they go through.
Yeah, that's
Um,
tough. I would stay away labeling
yeah.
his disease with
So
something in real life.
he's more like a just a strategic genius
Hmm.
gamer,
Okay.
right? And he starts to get a lot of kind of notoriety and fame as she gets her cancer, dies, gets resurrected, has to figure out what's happening to her. And so
Gotcha.
she's kind of angry with him, right?
Okay.
And so that's at the end where she needs to forgive, accept him, and they team up.
So you have her going through a dual change. And here's the thing that's interesting about complex character changes like this, where they actually have two stages of change.
Mm-hmm.
After their first stage of change, anchors that push and engines that push can switch places
Oh, okay.
because she's changed. So
Right.
so you've got your vehicle character, which is the character that we're living through. And then engines that push, I know you know this, I'm saying this more for anybody listening. Engines that push are characters that inspire them or challenge them to be the best version of themselves. Anchors that push are characters that inspire them or threaten them to be the worst version of themselves. A character can be threatening her to be the worst version of herself when it comes to control versus
Mm-hmm.
accepting the flow around her. Once she accepts the flow around her, she will reinterpret how she sees those anchors and engines that push and they can flip places.
Gotcha.
Now, an anchor that pulls is not likely, unless the change is massive, is not likely to become an engine that pulls. Does that make sense?
Right.
Like,
Yeah, that makes sense.
but
Yeah.
the two in the middle are super flexible because it really is about how she perceives them, right? Like it's about her
Mhm.
perception of these
Her
people.
perception. Yeah.
So as she changes, she can change her perception of Diego, and can become an engine in the second half of the book.
Mm.
And it's about
Mhm.
her
Mhm.
understanding.
Mhm.
You don't even need him to change necessarily. It's about her understanding of who he is.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And it kind of sounds
does.
like that's what you're doing with him. That in the first
Yeah.
half, he pisses her off because he's so obsessed with Tashi that he's an anchor that pushes.
Yeah.
And she's rejecting him because of his obsession. But then once she also accepts kind of the Tashi method, he becomes an engine that pushes.
Yeah.
Because now he's somebody who she wants to like. A lot of times there's a competitive streak between like co-students like that, and
Mhm.
they push each other to grow better. That's a lot of times where that, like, in trope sense, where that switch happens.
Okay.
Does that help, or does that just
Yeah.
confuse things?
No, yeah, it does. It does
Yeah.
actually a lot.
Any other characters you want to talk about?
So I guess did it seem like the cast of characters was fairly balanced?
It did. It's nowhere big enough for this
Oh,
size of a
really?
story. Yeah, you're gonna add characters all along here. Like I just said,
Okay.
like in the New York grid, you're gonna have a character that's like you're gonna have several characters that are like fighters that are either gonna be hazards for her,
Yeah.
that are gonna scare her.
I
I would
didn't list
actually,
everyone.
yeah, and you can't. You can't list
Yeah.
everyone. I
Right.
would think about your characters. Your novel's kind of built in sections.
Hmm.
I would think about your character in like parts, and you can really see it here in the location column
Right.
of like where the parts of your novel happen. Um, you've got these big sections that are happening in a single location.
Right.
I would probably try to analyze the character relationships in each location.
Okay.
I would like break down in these locations as I'm writing, kind of like, okay, what's she learning here? How's she changing here? How's she growing here? How does she perceive the different characters in this world? And then
Mm.
at the end of each move, when you're making a move to a different part of the story, make sure you have a moment for her of reflection where she's talking to somebody about what she's learned or like what's happened in that place that they're leaving, and you're setting up the challenge for the next place. Does
Okay.
that make sense? It's going to
Yeah.
become almost like a journey novel where she's got like a Mad Max, where he's got like stops along the road, and each
Yeah. Right.
stop you want to think about where he's been and then how he's changing and where he's going and
Yeah.
what's
Okay.
happening next. Yeah.
So I guess the only other question I think I would probably have around character is Toshi really a vehicle character, or is he just somebody that I need to tell some of the story in his point of view?
I mean, telling the story in his point of view means he has to have a growth arc or we don't care about it.
Okay.
It feels like if he doesn't have a growth arc, it feels like world building, and we're not interested in reading world building. Like nobody is.
Right. Right.
What brings us to the character is watching them
His
grow
growth
and
arc
change.
his growth arc isn't as big.
Yeah, it doesn't
Um,
need to be, which is why you have him as that like supporting vehicle, which I think is
yeah.
smart.
Okay. All right.
What I would do with Toshi though, what I am concerned about, like when I saw this
That's
right
just how
here,
how I wrote it.
okay.
I haven't figured out how to intersperse all of that.
Yeah, because we've got like 8,000 words in the past in his POV.
Right.
I would try to space those in between here. I might do like 2 Tera, a Toshi in the past, 2 Tera, a Toshi in the past, a Tera meets Cat, a Toshi in the past, maybe 2 Toshis in the past. Does that make sense? Like I try to
Yeah.
intersperse those chapters
Yeah.
between each other so it doesn't feel so like, and now we're in a Toshi novella.
Exactly. Right.
Unless you
Well,
just want to go ahead and break your book into parts and be like, this is, and just tell, and this is where like book formatting is actually a tool to help you communicate with the reader. You can be like
okay.
part 1
Oh.
and then part 2,
Mm-hmm.
and then part 3, right? Like that's something you can
Yeah.
do, especially since location is such a major blocker for you. I might be like, hey, this is a book in 5 parts.
Interesting. Okay.
And like, here's
I hadn't
part
actually thought
1,
about that. Yeah.
and then like part 2. And what that does is it communicates, you're using formatting to communicate to the reader. This is kind of its own thing.
Yeah.
And we're going to do this own thing. And then we're going to go to the next own thing so that they're not like in part 2 going, where's Tara? Right. Like, so does
Yeah.
that make sense? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
and it's just a way to communicate to the reader what you're doing.
The other thought I had too was just to take Toshi's whole backstory there and turn
Yeah,
it into its own novella. Take it out completely.
you can, but then you're not certain that somebody's going to read it. Now,
Well, that's true.
if you took it out of here, I would probably not make him a vehicle anymore. I would
Right.
try to
Yeah.
put all of these scenes in
Her
Tara's
POV.
POV. What's driving him to be a vehicle is this section here where you're in his POV.
Right.
So I would probably, and the question you have to ask is like, can I tell this story in the same way without seeing these scenes?
Right.
If you can, you should remove them. Right? If you can't, if you're like, no, these scenes so inform who he is, we have to see them in this novel, then I would try to break it into parts to designate to the reader, like, hey, this is its own thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a fair
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
Um, and again, you have nice dividing lines here. Like you can see them in your plot arc based on like where we're going, right? Like this reflection plane ride is probably the end of part 3.
Yeah.
And then we're in Tokyo, and the headquarters. The farm could potentially be a part 4. Yeah, so you've got like nice broken parts there. Does that make sense? Like it's already
Yeah.
kind of divided that way. I might just lean into it. Like this is what I'm
Okay.
doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I wonder, you have these Toshi scenes. I don't know. I'd probably keep them.
It's just because some of those she's not around.
She's not there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like this one right here.
Right.
Hmm. Yeah. I don't know. I think it works. I think you need to write through it, and as you write through it, you'll understand kind of more we discover things as we write. I would
Right.
though, for
Yeah.
your sake, as you think about character growth, I would think of it in parts. And I'd
Okay.
be like, what is she, because it's a long story where she's going to change and grow a lot,
Right.
to where like the Tara at the end of this book may not even look like the Tara at the beginning.
Hmm.
So I would break it into parts and ask myself, like, what aspect of change am I focusing on here? Otherwise it's going to get mushy. And
Yeah.
remember, when we talk about change, we're talking about internal.
Internal
Like
change. Yeah.
how is she personally changing to bring the external result that she wants?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that helpful? I feel like I'm just talking
Yeah.
at you. I don't know if that's
No,
helpful.
no, absolutely. No, this is great.
Okay. Um,
This
yeah.
helps because I think that's kind of where I've been stuck is, I blasted through that first half so fast that I was just like, okay, now where do I go?
Now what? Yeah.
and
I
I
wrote
have it,
myself
right?
out.
It's
Yeah.
there, but yeah, I think I was just concerned about kind of the plot structure. So this definitely helps.
And once you write it all out, you might find that, like, this is actually 5 novellas.
Yeah.
This isn't a single book, right? Like people do that. They're like, hey, this is 5 20,000 word short novellas that I'm going to sell individually and then also sell as a box set.
Yeah, like
Yeah, like a compendium. Yeah,
Yeah.
you might find that. So, but that's all marketing. Like,
Yeah.
you need to write the story, and then after you write the story, you'll see what you have.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think once you've written the story and you see what you have, then you're able to kind of take a step back and be like, okay, how do I make this digestible to a reader in a way that
Mhm.
excites the reader to keep moving through it?
Yeah.
I think the part structure works, but you just got to know anytime you created a separation for a reader, even down to a chapter break, you're inviting them
You
to
could
put it
lose
down.
them.
Yeah,
Right.
you're like, hey, go ahead and put this
Yep.
down. Now, the downside is readers get exhausted. So if you don't invite them to put it down, they get pissed at you and they're like, how long does this freaking thing go? So you have
Yep.
to give them breaks. But the question is like, how can you give them breaks in a way that entices them to go like, all right, I got to read the next part. Right.
Yeah,
Like,
you got to leave like a big cliffhanger or something at the end of each part, right?
yeah. And the reflection moments are good moments to do that because you're reflecting on what's learned and what's been gained, and then also reflecting on what's to come. Right. So you're like
Mm,
resettling in the mystery for the reader of like, how are we going to do that thing? Right. Like, so
yeah.
you're like, hey, by the way, the story's not over.
Yeah.
We still have
Yeah,
things to
right.
accomplish. Yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah. All right. Anything else I can do to,
Awesome.
anything else you want to talk about or that I can do to help?
No, no,
All
I think
right,
that's good.
man, this was fun and fast.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
this was good.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'll hit stop and we can talk a little bit more.
Okay.